Welcome back, and this is our final panel, and it'll explore the importance of building broader partnerships on FIMI with a focus specifically on Eastern Europe. The backdrop, as all of you know, is stark. In her annual speech to the European Parliament last month, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, "Europe must prepare itself today and will defend every inch of its territory." So, what is the view on the ground from the EU's neighbours, which sit on Russia's front line? We have Irène Mingasson from the European Commission. We have Anna Revenco from Moldova. We have online Artur Papyan from Armenia and Keta from Albania. First, let's hear a few words from each of them, and we will start with Anna from Moldova.
Yes. Hello, and thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with you and share our takeaways. You know, I'm receiving so many congratulations on behalf of Moldovans in terms of who made it happen, but our conclusions after 3 rounds of elections in 2 years is that we shouldn't drop the ball. And that's exactly the key takeaway that I want to share with you. Now, to go a little bit deeper, to detail on what does it mean for us. It's clear, black and white on our wall, if you want, and they look at us as rules that we should remind about every day. The informational war is a reality of every day for everybody in the country, and it will dominate the security agenda for the next decade, be it economic or political or social agenda. The adversary is on my ground. It's here, it's not somewhere far beyond the borders, and it's adapting very, very quickly. Much quicker than think tankers, academia, journalists, us here managed to put it all together, structure and synthesize. The arsenal of the democratic tools used to counteract is getting shrinker and shrinker, or is shrinking every day. And not only because it's the target, democracy as such, but it's already being used as a tool to actually attack democracy. Elections are only one hill that is, let's say, conquered, from which we can see much cleaner that we have to prepare for what will come, not if will come. And preparing between the elections, working between the elections is what can make a difference. Resilient society, resilient institutions is another important takeaway. Whole of the society approach is not a recommendation, is not may or not may do. It's a must, it must be taken as a rule. And in addition to FIMI response arsenal, the traditional one, state, stratcom, and regional partnership pillars must be included in this trio approach to address what will come. Protecting the results, once again, is resilient institutions and society. Very quickly, to take you through just bits of particularities of this complex and aggressive Russian information and hybrid warfare that was documented throughout the last 12 months, for which the leadership of the country, just before the elections, announced the state of siege. So we take it from this level of information threats when preparing for what will still come. Orchestrated energy crisis for Transnistrian region, aiming at generating a humanitarian collapse for a region with several thousands of inhabitants. Electoral and political corruption, and some NGOs estimate that it is at least €500 million put to destabilize the country. Dysfunctional state services and processes. Only in the morning of the election day, the state service responsible for the digital critical infrastructure documented 14 million incidents of cyber attacks. I can continue with such lists. These are more than unprecedented. We are talking about not episodes of disinformation and influence operation. We are talking about an information and hybrid war that is taken at professional industrial scale. Now, how do we respond? Like I said, government is not enough. We need to engage each and everyone in the society and consolidate this relationship state and citizen, citizen and the constitution. Traditional response to FIMI, everything that we know about the traditional arsenal, exposure, technical and political, attribution, use of policy, media policies, electoral policies, diplomatic finances on, criminal investigations into financial investigations, into crimes against the state. You know, it's almost became a normality. But it's far not enough. Like I said at the beginning, the arsenal is shrinking, and we have to look much deeper and how to increase the responsibility, not only engagement of many other parties in the state. Unity, trust, and cohesion. These are not only the ultimate targets of Russia disinformation and information manipulation warfare, it's exactly the tools that they are using to attack the societal cohesion and consensus. So State Stratcom and strategic communication and regional partnerships are critical for us in building a resilient society. A society that will be prepared to absorb the crisis that will come, because we need to look into at least a decade further from now on. What proactiveness? Yes. Countering instead of combating, or more countering than combating? Yes. Being proactive and less reactive, anticipatory in a complex manner, take this as indicators of efficiency and success. And last, where do we think we all collectively still failed? Speaking about increasing the costs for Russia, partnerships with media, partnerships with civil society, partnerships with businesses, small and big, with academic, we are still failing to engage all, not for the sake of research and analysis, but putting all the findings of research analysis into on wheels and using them to create more resilient society, but also expose the true face of Russia, because the public image of Russia is still at least neutral. There is so much still not done to increase the cost for the propagandistic machine of Russia by failing to engage independent media as well, and influencers, and analysts, and opinion leaders in showing the true face of Russia. And when I'm saying this, I'm not only referring to the conflict or war zones or wars provoked by Russia, including by showcasing what Russia is doing in Ukraine. I'm talking about the regular life of a regular Russian citizen in its own country as a consequence of policies adopted by their leaders. The failure to actually showcase the reality advantages Russia in promoting such narratives as Russia as a stability guarantor, as a peace guarantor, as a protector of those democratic and moral values. We still collectively fail to recognize and the danger for democracy, not within these very chambers, but at a high political level when it comes to security documents and policies on a regional level. Social networks, they're an important tool in the Russian FIMI ecosystem, and they still control what is going on the ground, and we still actually play obedient according to these rules and don't manage to increase the responsibility, not only the engagement and participation. International cooperation into financial investigations, because the amount that I mentioned to you is just one estimate from the documented cases, but documented both by state institutions but also by NGOs. If we put all the arsenal together and look into the possible costs, then the amount is much, much bigger. FIMI response is still persisting over Stratcom. What we are missing is being proactive, being in control of the narrative, and engaging each and every citizen in protecting its own country, in protecting the interest as per institution, as per constitution. Because, like I said, the conclusion is we don't have to drop the ball. We have to prepare for the next crisis, because it will come. It is not about if it will come. I'll stop here.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. That's the view from Moldova. Welcome, Artur, from Armenia. Can you tell us what the world looks like as far as FIMI is concerned from Armenia?
Well, thank you for this chance to share my story from Armenia. There is, in fact, so much disinformation about Armenia these days that I had the somewhat guilty pleasure of being able to choose between various narratives. And I have a video to share that I think is spot on, since you guys are based in London. And I'm going to play it for you real quickly, but please don't go away because I got more good stuff right after this. So I'm going to play this now.
Hello, I'm Catherine Roper, Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police. 2 months ago, I was working for the London Police. At that time, management strongly encouraged us to go on a business trip to Armenia to train Armenian police officers. I immediately sensed something was amiss. I looked into the matter and realised that they were trying to send us to train the police to use violence against peaceful protesters who would take to the streets of Armenia after the 2026 elections. I transferred to the Wiltshire Police along with 12 colleagues. We protest against our colleagues who agreed to go to Armenia at the behest of the criminal Papyan, and I recommend that our London leadership mind its own business in London and not meddle in the affairs of a sovereign state. Share this video with your family and friends via messengers and social media.
So we're coming back now, and you could see a video which is one in a chain of 60 that were recently uncovered by a Twitter account which specializes in Russian bots and disinformation. It's part of this so-called Matryoshka Russian disinformation network, which was talked about last year. And what this video is talking about is something that's very to the point for Armenia. So what are we up against? Right now, Russia has lost focus in the South Caucasus, somewhat because of its concentration to the Ukraine war. And Armenia has tried to use this opportunity to turn into the EU, is trying to integrate more with the EU. Armenia is also integrating more with the West by a new agreement signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan with the brokerage of US President Donald Trump, although he insists on calling Armenia Albania, but that's another story. And basically what is happening right now is Russia is losing its grip over Armenia and is trying to figure out how to fight back. And we are seeing in this context a range of cyber attacks and a range of misinformation, manipulation, and disinformation attacks. The set is staged, the stage is set, and the time is ticking till June 2026, when there will be crucial elections, which will define whether the current government headed by Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, will it stay in power and continue its current course, or will Russia be able to make a turnaround in Armenia just like they did in Georgia? And I'm so happy at looking at what happened in Moldova, because these two countries, Moldova and Georgia, are the two options that Armenia is looking at right now. We're either going to flip this way or that way, and we are up against, in many ways, in this disinformation campaign. The country is highly politicized and divided. We have about 60% voters who have not made up their minds. And this is a very fertile ground to just change the narratives and overnight turn the table in a way that Armenians might go and vote for somebody who is a pro-Russian candidate maybe, and who promotes the Russian narratives, which Anna kindly mentioned for me already. They're very, very similar, that Russia brings protection, that Russian economy helps Armenia, and without Russia we will die, and that we're not competitive in the Russian market, along with some much worse themes like EU, Russia is the protector of traditional values and morals, and all the disasters are coming from the West, and then there are those biolaboratories, etc., etc. So basically, this is the situation we're finding us itself. There is many months yet to go to the election, but the run has started on the Russian side, and we are just going to look at that and try to understand how are we going to fight back against this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's a really interesting sense of being at the crossroads. Riyad, from Albania, what's the view from Albania?
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. My brief presentation will be themed to the Albanian experience in combating and preventing FIMI. I will start my presentation following the third panel theme, that was public perception. Until recently, Albanian public perception in regard of FIMI and disinformation has been quite passive in a sense, or has considered itself distant from other Balkan countries or countries that belong to the former communist bloc. This changed in July 2022, when the whole digital infrastructure of the Albanian government was attacked by a cyber attack from an Iranian cyber group. This caused the failure for a short time of the services from the digital infrastructure of the Albanian government, and caused minor leaks of governmental data. Why this happened? This was based on the fact that in Albania it is settled an Iranian opposition group since 2012, and nowadays there are quite 2,000 to 3,000 members. So this was the awakening moment in the Albanian public perception. In the follow-up, what is interesting in the cultural sense is that from being passive, there was this growing number of allegations of cases of FIMI and disinformation campaigns. So the page turned to the other side. There were allegations from political actors, economical actors, that were facing this. Time to time they were just rumors on social media. Time to time they became public. It is hard to define and separate which were legit allegations and which were just pretense. But what can be said for sure, that there were cases that were legit, and this is not a personal assessment, but was one of the main findings of the ad hoc parliamentary committee that was established in Albania in regard of foreign interference and disinformation. This ad hoc parliamentary committee was established in April 2024, and institutionally speaking was a follow-up of the request from the European Commission in regard of facing disinformation, and also as a follow-up of a memorandum of understanding and cooperation with the American government. The work of the committee, how they dealt. There were two channels, shortly. It was the parliamentary, the MPs that had their public session with officials from that was relevant to the topic, and also was the working group with different experts from NGOs, universities. And these experts were divided in 4 groups that were, in fact, the pillars of this committee. The first team was electoral matters, market security, security in general, focus on cybersecurity, and the 4th was disinformation. So these were the 4th theme. It was hard to work on this topic because it was a new, complex, day-to-day changing theme. It was taken into consideration the experiences from UK was one of them, America, France. Also, it was crucial and vital to the work of the committee, the assistance with the 2 TAIEX missions that was guaranteed from the EU embassy in Tirana. The output of this committee and the strategy itself. The strategy has 3 main outputs.
Look, I'm going to have to wind you up, but yes, that would go.
I will speed up. 3 was the action plan, that is the most crucial act in this thing. 2 institutions that will be established in this regard to face FIMI and disinformation. And 3rd will be the legal amendments. And this I need to stress out, because all the legal amendments that were required weren't in a sense new, that weren't part of the Albanian government engagements. They were all part of the EU road of Albania, but with a special focus on FIMI. For example, the new law on financial activity that is planned to be approved within 2026 in Albania. The strategy requested to have a focus regarding FIMI, so the channels that deal. The lobbying law, that is also. DSA also, that is really tool and was spoken about in the first session. So all the legal requirements were the same, but with a special angle in regard of FIMI. And sorry for that.
No, that's fantastic. It really fascinating, and actually the kind of common coordination, integration, anticipation. Irène. So Irène is, how do you think about what you have heard about what's going on the eastern fringes of the EU? And in terms of Ursula von der Leyen's challenge, for a view, Irène is from the Foreign Policy Instrument, or FPI, and she runs the emergency response to FIMI.
FIMI and a couple of other threats, actually. Indeed, thank you very much. It's great to be on this panel. It's the end of the day, but I'm really happy that we are now talking about what we're doing together on the ground to address this. Not to say that the previous panels were not very action-oriented, but what I would like to say, and that would be my first point, is that for us, the EU, or friends of the EU, what happens in the information spaces of others, of our friends, also has an impact on us. I would like to go back to what one of the previous panels was concluding upon, which was that, yes, we are in a state of war, or we are on a war footing, no doubt, but we can end any discussion about the grave threat of FIMI with a note of optimism, because there's things that we can do about, and there's allies that we can work with, and these partnerships actually are operational and yield good results. So what I'd like to say, perhaps in starting, and that informs the work of the Service for Policy Instruments that I work for in the European Commission, which works under the authority of the High Representative Kaja Kallas, working side by side with our diplomatic service, because we work in Brussels, but mainly we work in the countries with our friends on the ground, is that, FIMI, disinformation, these very well orchestrated, very well resourced attacks are the reality that we face today. In Europe, in our countries, and us also in the information space of others. And we have been working with countries increasingly in the last 10 years or so in assessing, understanding better the threat, identifying it, and then gradually also adapting the responses to the evolution. Our role as FPI, we are the Rapid Response Service, is to be a little bit at the forefront of these efforts. We are not the ones that intervene on the long term. Other parts of the institutional setting of the EU does do that, but we have been, as first responded, the witnesses of how the threat emerges, how it has been developing. Just now, in the more recent phase of our actions, we have been considering, and so much has been said about it, much better than I would be able to, about how AI can in the future be more explored to mobilize to resist malign information actors, how digital monitoring tools can help journalists counter these polarizing narratives, and how also we could develop algorithms to foster early warning system, and generally be able to adapt our responses to the almost industrial scale of these attacks. But what I wanted to say chiefly is about 10 years of cooperation with partners on the ground, which was always multi-layered, and Anna, you mentioned that, and friends before also. There's 3 strands of work. One is to support institution building for more effective government responses. We're called upon to work with partner countries. The second one is working with independent media. The third one has to do with society, and that's civil society mainly. And if you give me 2 more minutes, I'd like to share, very broad brush, but there are a number of lessons we can learn, we can draw from that. I'd like to outline 4. One is that, of course, we learn a lot from these partnerships, us also in the EU. The first is that clearly this whole of society approach, which was so brilliantly described in the previous panel, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources to build, but it is by far the most effective pushback even against these super well orchestrated and resourced FIMI operations. And we saw that notably in Moldova. Anna, you mentioned different stages of this orchestration, and we have been able to work on this and to actually shatter the myth of Russian invincibility in the FIMI domain, and that's a very important victory. The second lesson is we're in this for the long run, and we need to think long term, we need to invest in this. And that's what institution building is about. It's government, national institutions, but it's also the other actors, the platforms for fact checkers, the networks of journalists, the linkages between authorities and civil society, this infrastructure. The third one is, because FIMI touches the human, is that we need to remember that societal resilience starts with human resilience, with strengthening the fabric of this resilience. And I was just mentioning support to journalists, and this networking of journalists is part of what we can do to also help with the psycho-social well-being of those who operate in these super threatened environments. Well, and the last one I mentioned before is that we need to look about the new technologies, how they can help us respond at the industrial level to these threats. My just final concluding word is yes, this is, we're on the war footing. Yes, the threat is one that we can call a war-like threat, but we need to be optimistic, and we can, because we have allies and friends.
That's fantastic. I'm going to open this up to questions in a moment, but before that, I just want to ask each of you, you've heard from Irène, she is very keen to both work with all of you, but also understand the learnings that you've gone through. What's briefly, one learning you would want others to learn from your experience of what you've gone through? Anna.
On the one hand, I already mentioned don't drop the ball, but technically speaking, it means anticipation, systemic approach, resilient society, strong partnerships.
It's really interesting. Artur.
What I understand.
Oh, sorry. Hold on just a moment. We can't hear you. Yeah, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
My key takeaway so far has been that there's nothing like media literacy to protect the society from FIMI. If people know to check their sources, to double check and to always doubt, that has more value than if you pour all kinds of technological innovations into detecting and debunking information. So my way to go forward is to educate our society and to make sure they're media literate.
Interesting. Reald.
I have two things to mention. Both aren't original, in fact. The first would be public awareness.
Yeah.
Not waiting for the damage to be done and to mediate with it. Just preventing it is important. The second is, as a legal expert on electoral matters, I'd like to remind that the enemies of democracy are old, in a sense that they are old as democracy. And to fight them, even though the instruments are new, always finding for the new, but we need to remind to ourselves what's the democracy about and what are the pillars, how it is constituted. So transparency, institutions, public trust into them. So these are, and all the tools that democracy can use are these, facing the same old enemies, but with new tools.
Fantastic. And Irène, you look at Moldova, Albania, Armenia. What have you learned? What have you looked at the specifics there and learned and thought actually you can scale up those learnings across the EU?
Well, the 4 lessons I mentioned before, I think valid across the board. And by the way, FBI works on this global threat at the global level. So there's also a lot we can learn from similar work in Latin America, in Asia, where more and more of this is unfolding also. And again, where we're doing it is to support our friends, our partners in the world, but also because it's a solidarity-based approach, but it's also one that is aimed at defending our own interests as well, because where it weakens the systems, the values of our friends, often it also targets us. So it's solidarity and strategy-based. But what I'd like to say then is, optimism is important. That's again my key word from before. We have allies and there's appetite to work with the EU more and more and globally, and that's important. And we need determination. And I'd like to go back, you were mentioning before the President von der Leyen's words at the latest State of the Union speech. Very determined, and you see that the fight against FIMI, that threat that is identified as what it is, now the new reality, is now at the highest level of our political agenda, and it's shared by many. It is now clearly understood as an urgent hybrid security threat, and there's something we can do about it. What we can do about it is called the European Democracy Shield. And I'd like to have a word on this. It was mentioned before. And without going into too much of the specifics, because this is all going to be unfolded soon,
no, but we're really
what it is about is that, as I said, it's strategic, it's solidarity-based, but it's also the interest of the EU and those of our friends who share our values. It's not about just protecting the EU, its territory, and the territory of its EU member states. It's also about protecting our values and the values of those for whom these values are important.
So it's outside the EU as well?
What affects our interest, our values in the information space of others fires back onto the EU. So what this Democracy Shield is about is also bringing together the expertise and the learnings within the EU and with those around the world that we work with to fight against this rising threat in the most effective way, and to make it more difficult for those who attack us. And it's possible.
Very interesting, really interesting. That's new. Fantastic. Very specific question to you, Irène. What role does the FPI play in fostering partnerships to combat FIMI? Do you want to say just one sentence on that as well?
Well, we are at the forefront of these threats. We call in when emergency calls us to do something, both because our partners are in difficulty or because also our interests are at stake there. So that is what we're going to continue doing. We have across the globe been running in the last years a very considerable amount of projects. A lot were concentrated in these immediate neighborhood of the EU countries, but it continues, and we will continue working with the different layers. So that's institutions, that's governments, that's media, that's civil society, for this whole society resilience strategy to be stronger and stronger.
Fantastic. I'm going to turn to you in just a moment, but before that, I want to turn to each of you and say, looking a year ahead, do you see the problem of Russians' activities and information manipulation and interference as an escalating threat? And if so, why? Do you think it's going to stay at this level, or do you think it's going to move?
I've already mentioned that Russia, or adversary, is adapting very fast. And the informational warfare as part of the hybrid warfare apparently has increased in the importance, and judging by the effect it can produce. And when I'm saying the effect, look into how it targets the unity of a nation, because the intent is to divide, to weaken the society. A weak society is easier to conquer. Demoralization, that's exactly what they want. That's why they exploit the vulnerabilities. That's why I say that knowing your vulnerabilities is equally important as knowing the advantages of the adversary. Why? Because these very societal vulnerabilities, or institutional or systemic, they are or will be exploited by Russia in order to instrumentalize the war and produce those effects. There are few important elements of this in this ecosystem that advantage Russia. And I already mentioned, it's also the way the digital platforms, the social networks, technologies are being used by Russia. And we are still behind. Yes, there are a lot of talks. Yes, there are a lot of discussions. Like I mentioned, a lot of researchers and examples, but we are still behind. We document what already happened, okay? Then we structure and we synthesize and we know. And we can always bring us and all of the others and many partners, like you mentioned, we all continue bringing new evidence that these are the new tactics, these are new proceeds, this is how they adapt and doing. For example, this year, Russia has used new techniques that we never seen last year. The pseudo opinion polls, you know, to micro-target that were conducted online. Hide it behind various accounts and sites were promoting tourism, beauty, and whatever. But that was exactly in the idea to inoculate ideas that EU is a threat, that the democratic way of governance is not what will bring stability, and also to learn more about those who could be targeted with regard to specific messages. It wasn't used before, they only tested it. Or artificial intelligence used to the extent where you can no longer recognize whether it's a real person or not. The very real interview with the head of Electoral Commission was distorted by use of AI to deliver a completely different message. And it was done in a very soft way. And it's already a reality. How we are going to protect the next elections, and not only elections, democratic processes, when technology that can bring so much value and advantages is used to actually destroy it. We are still, and I insist to say, we are still behind this. Too much still analysis. We need to increase the level of responsibility. So my answer to you shortly, it is not only about whether it's escalate or not, but what do we understand in terms of the impact it will have? Because if propagandistic machine, if influence operations bring the result that Russia wants, divided society, discredited democratic authorities, undermine credibility for the European democratic vector, then they will use it, and they will use all possible techniques at the industrial level, and they will put more money, because money to orchestrate destabilization they will always find. And they will always turn also to those partners whom we didn't yet reach, including outside the EU.
Okay, thank you. Same question to you, Artur. How do you see the year ahead? Do you see this as an escalating threat or not?
I think that the FIMI campaign against Armenia is already aggressive, and it's expected to intensify, mostly because of Armenia's perceived turn towards the West in the upcoming elections. Russia views Armenia's diplomatic moves, such as the expulsion of Russian border guards and the deepening of relations with the West, as well as the signing of a regional peace declarations with Azerbaijan, as a direct threat to its influence. So the FIMI campaign will serve as a retaliation and strategic tool to keep Armenia in its orbit. Also, because Russia has its hands tied in the Ukraine, he has no way of using force, so FIMI is sort of the main alternative of using force in this technological way. They are certainly going to target the elections, which are approaching in 2026, and FIMI is expected to escalate, and it's going to be directed at undermining the incumbent pro-Western maybe government of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, and help the pro-Russian proxies to gain momentum and to sort of gain seats in the parliament and in various ways destabilize the country. As for the core, like overarching European ways, I still see that there is more opportunity for Russia to further escalate. This is fueled by technological changes, because it's easier and easier to use generative AI for creating new content. And Russia we are seeing this being exploited already, and I'm sure for content creation is going to grow more and more. And we're going to see sophisticated cloning techniques, disseminating high quality video disinformation, just like pieces that I showed you earlier. And I feel that Russia is going to also promote narratives related to like Europe's support for Ukraine, Europe's support for Eastern Partnership countries. It's going to try to fuel polarization and so distrust and disinformation along those lines.
Thank you. Briefly, that would...
As not being an expert on the matter, I will need to refer to analytical documents. And one that I consider really brilliant in this regard is a late assessment from NATO that regarding Balkan countries consider that Russia, in the Russians' doctrine, the aim is the status quo. So things not to change, to stay in this level. And for what I can assess, that's pretty diabolical in a sense, because if things get worse, it means it's a double-edged sword. It means more tension from the outside, also a public awareness may rise. So with kind of a status quo, for example, Albania not getting into EU or other countries not getting into EU or economical progress, the tension stays the same, but the erosion from public perception gets higher. So with the minimum effort, you get a higher achievement.
Finally from you, Irène, the year ahead.
I totally agree with what was said just before. We see that the threat, becomes worse in the run-up to elections, for instance. But we know that we need to be permanently vigilant about that. That what's at stake is also the position targets the EU, the policies, the trade deals, the relations with partners. I mean, it's permanent. And that perhaps now is not the time anymore to overanalyze. I think everybody understands what the threat is about and where it comes from. So yes, what's good is that today it is at the highest level of the political agenda. It's been identified as such. I think that's going to be followed by a show of determination. We are ready for that, and we need to work together. Yeah.
Fantastic. With that, do we have any questions from the floor? This lady over here. Can you tell us your name and where you're from?
Yes, Eloise Grant-Goody, Durham University. My question is specifically for Artur, as I worked in Yerevan over the summer, and I know that we focus mainly on Russian FIMI, but I was wondering if you could comment on your experience and Armenia's experience dealing with Azerbaijani FIMI, specifically perhaps the expansionist narratives of Western Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Artur.
Thank you for the question. Armenia is actually flooded with FIMI, not just from Russia, but from Azerbaijan, as correctly noted. And we see that Azerbaijan uses very interesting techniques for penetrating Armenian mediascape with its FIMI campaigns. Very often it will actually go through Russian media, because while Armenians do not speak Azerbaijani, most Armenian population, 90%, I'd say, speak Russian. And Russian media has a very big, deep penetration into the Armenian media landscape. And very often, even Armenian media outlets, which are in Armenian, will get their news translated from Russian media outlets. So certainly there are big narratives from Azerbaijan, including Western Azerbaijan, as correctly noted, content related to something called Zangezur Corridor, everything related to refugees. If you know the context, there have been years, 30 years of bloody war between the nations. There are refugees on both sides, and so Azerbaijan will wholly deny the existence of refugees from Armenia, of Armenian population, and then exaggerate and speak about refugees on its side. We view this as part of the current trends that every war, every conflict is always accompanied by hybrid information component. So that's pretty normal. This is basically it, and the interesting turn in this is the main thing that very often Azerbaijanis will just skip and try to go through Russian media outlets just to penetrate to the Armenian information space.
Thank you. Any more questions? This lady over here.
Hi all, thanks so much. Isabella Wilkinson, I do disinformation and geopolitics at Chatham House. I have a couple questions, if I can be cheeky, sorry about that. The first is I really enjoyed a running theme throughout the panel, which is strategic measures to increase the costs of FIMI, particularly on our adversary Russia. some further reflections on strategically, financially, what it means to increase the costs embedded within this FIMI infrastructure would be incredibly interesting. And my second question is for everyone, maybe best targeted at Irène. I'd be interested in where you see the most effective mechanisms for perhaps leveraging these cross-border lessons in effective whole-of-society approaches. So when your unit, when you're working across the Commission to find these best practices, these national examples, what mechanisms, what networks do you use to then disseminate these lessons across borders? How effective are they? And perhaps do they need to adapt to a changing threat landscape? Thanks so much.
Brilliant, thank you. Irène, I'm going to put both of them. What can you practically do to increase the costs to Russia of disinformation?
Oh, that question was over there. I'd like to go back to the dissemination of the good practices, if that's okay. I think that was the question to us. Huh? Well, it's a really good one, because it's true that the way we work is, on these rapid response short-term programs. The idea being that we pilot initiatives, we try things with actors locally. If it works well, somebody else is going to take it up in our institutional setting or one of the EU member states or another actor. How to disseminate it better? I think that, what we're quite good at is bringing actors together. Actually, a moment like today is one such. I think, and we probably have sat together enough in this room, and we need to set to work and try and come up with more ideas. I think it is, building these networks, exposing the different geographies to each other, in the academic field, in the networks of journalist field, and there are many others where we could continue working in this. And I think that this is probably, I was saying at the beginning that we're entering a bit of a new phase. We've done a lot of work, we've learned a lot of things. Clearly on the tech side, there's something that we need to escalate now and go probably into a completely different, probably more proactive and aggressive dimension of this, countering or being proactively engaged on this. But in what we have built in instilling a sense of confidence, resilience in our countries, this is something that we must definitely not lose and continue nurturing. And we have a very broad diplomatic network across the world, and all of these actors are connected, also through these diplomatic channels of our EU delegations.
Fantastic, thank you. Very briefly, Anna, increasing the costs to Russia, how?
I think we have to have a look here, a two-folded approach. Domestically, I mentioned to you earlier that we need to be very aware of, and it's relevant to each nation, in my opinion, we need to be very aware of our systemic vulnerabilities that Russia, like I said, is or will be using. In our case, in case of Moldova, we have mapped our systemic vulnerabilities that helped Russia basically orchestrate crises and use those crises as an opportunity to push for the narratives and achieve the effect that I mentioned also earlier, the division of the society, or discrediting the whole idea of EU and the democratic European path. Now, it was built, these vulnerabilities for decades. For example, energy dependence. It was very easy for Russia to, close it and provoke this humanitarian crisis. Or I'll mention another examples regarding trade and business. So to what extent economy of a country is dependent or not on, let's say, another country. In our case, it was for decades depending, a big portion of our industry was dependent on the Russian market, such as products of agricultural nature, like wines and fruits and vegetables, and the 3 embargoes that were imposed once, let's say, in 7 years, they were putting our economy on the knees. And that means capacity of an adversary, not only to produce an interference, but the results of this interference then multiply and create use it as part of further disinformation or information manipulation campaigns. So it is about handling those kind of sectorial. the less dependent and the more independent, or if you're developing capacity to partner with trusted and previsible partners, then it's also an idea. This is also a way to increase the costs of the adversary. This is least to say, but I mentioned about the influence, for example, of Russian media. And it is not locked down in one country. It's about how they manage to integrate within the overall global media infrastructure. And for example, I'll give you another example. What they did is they started, and we've seen this as part of the FIMI tactics this year, creation of multiple pseudo-media websites, showcasing them as European trusted, okay? But pseudo because they only refer to the articles that were posted on those pseudo media websites while referring to them while writing articles in national domestic media in order to increase the credibility of the information. How are we going to deal with that? What does it mean, media policies in our days? What is media, traditional, alternative, and so on? Do we engage sufficient media in this regard? How we allow also media associations and, in protecting themselves? Okay. Now, this is domestically, but globally, as I mentioned already, it's support to other democracies by sharing our experience. For example, with Armenia, support democracies that are under threat in staying strong, gaining new partners, those who are still in the influence orbit of Russia, by sharing, exposing what Russia is orchestrating abroad. But like I said earlier, it is also important to showcase what is actually happening also in Russia with regard to a simple citizen. You know, it's easier for Russia to reach out to the mind of hearts of people with this narrative, gas is cheap, if we actually don't show what is happening in Russia with regard to gas supply and gas price and so on. So how we actually, are we fighting in a smart way? Or are we only detecting when it happens and still act in an old-fashioned type, still doing a lot of research, but less action and less engagement and the actual responsibility for these actions? Follow the money. Financial investigations are critically important, and financial investigation when it comes to foreign jurisdictions as well. In our case, throughout the last 2 years, Russia has always adapted to each action of the police to cut a mechanism. They used, for example, pensioners, old people, as mules to transport money. If it's stopped by the police, then they started to organize pseudo visits of priests, then summer camps for children, then training courses for teachers, paying for charter flights. Then when everything was stopped, then they turned into another financial schemes, such as distributing bank cards connected to the banks under international sanctions in Russia. When that was stopped, then they turned into special schemes on Telegram, and it will just continue, showing how determined they are. So us acting in anticipation and in partnership with other countries, reaching out to all the relevant state and non-state, including private businesses handling financial or banking or media operations, it is important.
Thank you. We've got time for one final question. Lots of hands are up. Is that Damien at the back?
Thank you. It was great to hear from a number of people today, and particularly from the European Commission, about the increasing political importance of counter-FIMI. Counter-FIMI costs money, and we also heard that 2 of the main sources of that have dried up. So that's US foreign aid budgets and also platform-funded projects. So there is a resource problem. My question is, given that NATO members are under pressure to increase the percentage of GDP for defense spending, What are the barriers to including counter FIMI within definitions of defence spending? Is that a possibility? And would some thought need to be given about independence of media if that entailed funds going through defence agencies?
Question. Irène, many of your members are under pressure, are NATO members and under pressure to increase defence spending. Do you think that FIMI should be chalked against defence budgets?
Okay, that's a very broad question. I think I'm not in a position to answer this fully. But the fact that it is now identified as not just a passing circumstance, but an actual threat, that this is part of, notably, Russian warfare, and that it is today very high on the political agenda and has been mentioned as one of the priorities within an overall discourse which is very much influenced by current defense and security imperatives for the EU, in the EU and among its friends, I think augurs very positively to the means that are going to be attributed to that. The way it's going to be done and the way, indeed, defense spending in general is going to be optimized among those who actually carry the defense budget, which is the member states, not the EU budget itself, is under discussion. You are aware that at the moment the discussions for the future multi-annual financial framework, the discussions are ongoing. The European Commission has made a proposal. Defense and security is, of course, among the big priorities and how to accompany this. The discussion is now with the budgetary authority, that's the EU member states and the Parliament. Let's follow this very closely. It is clear that it is the game of today. Where FIMI fits and how European budgets are going to match the resources that Russia, for instance, is putting into this, I think needs to be looked at from a different angle. Russia pays a lot, sometimes enormous amounts, to destroy countries in the world, countries it targets, and actually ultimately itself. That's not what we do. We pay to invest into resilience and into lasting, resilient societies. What is going to have an impact on the longer run? Okay, I leave it to you to think about. I hope that's another, again, optimistic view to take away with us and to set us all to work. So it's not a question of matching the budgets, it's a question of how we use the resources that we have collectively to be more intelligent and more effective together. I would like to leave it at this. Your question is super relevant and pertinent. I think we need to look at it in a strategic, longer-term way. Which is sure is that we are in this in the long run.
Okay, Anna, one sentence.
I would like to jump in here. Thank you very much for this question. At least from the Moldovan experience, that was a very important breakthrough and step ahead. In December 23, Moldova for the first time approved the national security strategy that for the first time admitted FIMI and stabilized that Russia is a foreign threat. That generated a number of actions that allowed anticipation, better coordination, synchronized actions, including capacitating various institutions, and of course it's related to budget. So when I mentioned earlier that there is a need to increase not only the societal understanding and awareness of the issue, but strictly on the political level to make it part of a collective security agenda and make it black and white, FIMI and Stratcom part of the definitions of defense and security.
Okay. Artur, one sentence. Do you see FIMI as part of your defense budget and strategy?
Not in any way, because as a long-time journalist, I think that media independence actually matters. And if we make media part of defense budget, we're going to lead this into accusations about dependence of media and this is a little bit different things. We shouldn't mix things just because we're under attack. We cannot allow for erosion of our core values. This is what I wanted to say.
One sentence.
I won't be original. It depends. It depends. For example, in Albania, I think that stronger journalism would be a good tool to face FIMI. But in the other realities, I guess that wouldn't be just enough.
Fantastic. Thank you to our brilliant panel. That has been really, really insightful. Can we give them a round of applause? That is it for what I think has been a really fabulous day. It's been really, really interesting. My big takeaways are, first of all, the way in which this is being talked about. Irène, you talked about being on a war footing. We've heard democracy is at stake, and even the Enlightenment and evidence-based decision-making. But it's also been a year, I think, in which as well as talking about a new threat level, there's also been a much more practical response about what is to be done, and the time for analysis is over. We've heard a lot about joining up governments, joining up between governments, joining up within countries that aren't necessarily, between countries that aren't necessarily part of formal alliances. And also, we clearly sit here in the UK, and the backdrop is the relationship between the UK and the EU, and working together, the way they are both working together on this. What we've heard a lot about is the need for investment in civil society, because that is, and the media, both of which are under strain. We've heard about AI mobilization and the relationship with platforms and the way that that's become more practical. And I think finally, it's a steady state. It's not, it's a feature, not a bug, FIMI, and therefore collaboration, anticipation, the operationalization of some of the really interesting insights that we've heard, as well as the response, have certainly been things that I've been thinking about. So what is still to be done? There's been a lot on what the costs of spreading FIMI could be, and more on AI and technology, and finally on bringing trust to the relationship with populations as a foundation of everything. I'd like to thank all of our panels and participants throughout the day, and I'd like to thank the EU Embassy to the UK for putting this on, and to all of you for turning up. So thank you very much.